Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that you'll find all my other reviews of Stephen King adaptations in my Stephen King playlist, and there will be spoilers today. This movie is 34 years old at this point. It was directed by a guy called Ralph Singleton. I hardly know anything about him because he has no wiki page, and according to IMDb, this was the only movie he ever directed. He did some producing and editing or something, but it's a bit weird how he just turned up, directed this one movie, and then vanished into thin air. It's not like this is a bad movie or even an extremely low-budget movie, so yeah, it's odd. If you know anything about Ralph Singleton that I don't, please drop it in the comment box below. So if you feel like you're not that familiar with the title of this, given that it's by Stephen King, that will probably be because it's based on a short story rather than one of his novels. Graveyard Shift was released as part of the Night Shift collection, a fantastic book. There's so many great stories in Night Shift, and Graveyard Shift is one of the very best. Don't get it confused, by the way, with the 1987 film Graveyard Shift, which I believe was about vampires, although I've never seen it myself. But this one is really great. The short story is about this college dropout called Hall, H-A-L-L. He only has a surname in the short, a bit like in the Mel Gibson film Payback. He's only got a surname, Porter, that's it. So Hall, he goes around from town to town getting various different jobs, and then he winds up at this textile mill in Maine, and this is like one of the worst places in the world you could work. It's dirty, it's rat infested, it's really low pay, you don't get treated very well. I get that this was like the 70s when Stephen King wrote this story, but please tell me you have better working regulations in America in 2024 than what you get in this story. So Hall ends up doing overtime one weekend. He and a bunch of other people are asked to clear out the basement, but the rat problem is even worse down there. There are even some rats as big as cats. It's not very nice down there. They come across this trapdoor that leads down to another level beneath the basement, and down there it's all dark, and it turns out there's like this giant mutated rat. It's described as being like a cow by Stephen King. It's a really great story, and the movie plays out more or less like the story. I mean, they've expanded the characters somewhat, but the progression of the horror is quite similar, although the movie is absolutely a creature feature. So in the short story, the main mutated rat was static. It couldn't move from its position. It was like this weird thing that had no legs, or I guess. Plus there were lots of flying rats that could use their tails to wrap around your neck and stuff. But in the film, the giant rat can actually move around. It can act a bit like a slasher killer. Like at one point it turns up on the 3rd floor in an office just picking somebody off at like 1 a.m. But this isn't as silly as it sounds, because you never really see what the rat creature looks until the 3rd act. You get little glimpses of parts of him, but you don't get a full look until very late on. So even when the creature is turning up in random places, it still has the desired effect for me. And then you've got the normal sized rats who are all over the building. They kind of act like the scarab beetles in the 1999 Mummy film. You know, the beetles were there to kind of give an assist to the mummy from time to time. Well, the normal sized rats do that for the giant rat creature in this film, but it's got a very oppressive, bleak atmosphere, this. I thought that for a concept like this, you know, a giant rat creature thing, I thought they might think, well, that's a bit too silly to make a proper horror film. We'll have to do something like Lake Placid or Return of the Living Dead, something like that, you know, where it's half a bunch of kills and half a bit of black comedy, you know, a bit of a lighter tone. But no, this is pretty dark all the way through, right from the first scene where this one worker sees these rats, and the rats kind of back him into this machine and he gets all mangled up. I thought, ooh, what have we got here? This looks like it's going to be good. The casting in this is very mixed, so I'll come to Brad Dourif shortly, but in terms of the two leads, played by David Andrews and Kelly Wolfe, Andrews is playing Hall, but it's a much more simplified version of the character than what you get in the short story. So in the short, Hall was almost like a sociopathic type character. It was sort of implied that the reason he's moving around from town to town is that nothing really satisfies him, and what he's really looking for is something weird and out of the ordinary to properly stimulate him, even if that something just happens to cause the deaths of lots of people. He's not necessarily the nicest of people under the surface. At times it feels like he's relishing the situation of the mutated rats in Graveyard Shift. But all that is gone from the movie version of Hall. In this, he's become the same sort of everyman hero that you've seen 1,000 times before, which I think is a real shame. The woman Kelly Wolfe is playing has clearly been shoehorned in there as a love interest to Hall just because movie convention says you've got to have a love interest. I don't think there were even any women in the original short story, but this was totally the wrong film for romance because this mill is dirty and disgusting and it probably smells like rat feces and everybody's dressed in coveralls and gloves and doesn't look very sexy at all. I mean, if you've got a film that takes place mostly in a police precinct or a college dormitory, yeah, throw in some sexy time because, you know, those sorts of environments can be very sexy, but not this rat-infested dump where you could easily catch a disease just by turning up for work. You probably got to work with a nose peg on your nose. At one point, these two main characters share a little kiss on the lips, and you can sort of tell that these actors are thinking, really, in this environment? Not if this was real life. And I'm sat there thinking, what have they potentially just given each other by having this one kiss after working here all day long? The other woman in this is an office secretary who is having it off with her boss to sort of progress herself, I guess. Yeah, they're doing that whole stereotype. Why is it so many office secretaries are just sluts in order to get with their boss? I think we had a character like this in the Salem's Lot adaptation as well. This particular character, she ends up falling down some stairs in the most random way. It's the most stupid way to die. Another notable character is Warwick. He's like the supervisor at the mill. He was a big character in the short story. Now, this is a guy who, I guess most of us have met a character like this in real life, regardless of whether you work in a factory or an office. You know, this sort of person turns up everywhere. He's the sort of person who gets a bit of minor power, but they're not actually that bright. They're probably not going to progress that much further, but in the meantime, they've got this little bit of power and they're really nasty to people. They expect too much. They don't care if people get hurt as long as the targets are being met, and they're possibly a nice person at home and in real life, but when they get to work, they just become this absolute nightmare. Come on, we've all met somebody like Warwick. But one of the clever things about Graveyard Shift is that it's not just about the giant mutated rat. It's also this workplace horror where there's these dodgy work health and safety practices. You know, a lot of the kills are not just because of the rats, it's because this mill is in disrepair. It's a death trap, it's an accident waiting to happen. The first kill, the guy who backs into the machine, he does that partly because there's no proper guardrail, and then later on in the thing you've got characters trying to run down corridors and they're falling through these rotted floorboards to their death because nobody's maintained the building. You know, I like it when films have a secondary horror to go alongside the primary horror, especially when the secondary horror is so much different. So you've got this fantastical element of the rats, a situation that couldn't happen in real life, but then you've got this workplace horror that absolutely could happen in real life, and I think the two intermingle in this film, go very well together. It's just a shame that the character of Warwick has been really badly cast. He's played by a guy called Stephen Macht. I've never come across this guy before. He's clearly a foreign actor. In the short story, it was just a random American, but they've cast a foreign actor here. But the problem is not that he's foreign. The problem is that he's got this really weird octave in his voice. It is the things that he's saying seems to go up and down in volume. And this doesn't happen to any of the other characters in this movie. I don't know if this actor always acts like this or whether he's just chosen to play this particular part in a weird way, but it doesn't work. Like, this performance almost took me out of the movie. I just couldn't get down with the way that Macht is playing this part, and he's turned this villain, if you want to call him that, into just random mean person with no depth, whereas I feel like he really could have been the focal point of the workplace horror side of the film. I did say I would talk about Brad Dourif, so he's playing a really fun role here. Just when you think you've seen all the really kooky parts that Dourif has played in his career, up pops another one that you didn't know about. So he's playing a rat exterminator here. Very much reminds me of, was it John Goodman who was playing the spider exterminator in Arachnophobia? This is a very similar kind of side role that definitely adds to the movie. And Dorothy is being very Dorothy here. And his death is absolutely due to the disrepair of the mill. It's nothing to do with the rats. There's not a rat in sight when Brad Dourif gets killed in this. There's so many good deaths, though, that are caused by the rats. Lots of good blood and guts and gore in this. The way that the main rat envelopes his victims with these giant wings is really freaking. You just know that bad things are going on to the victim beneath the wings. You can just see their head popping out from above the wings when they're sort of suffering their last moments in their lives as well. Definitely some good stuff there. There's a funny scene very early on when Hall goes into this cafe and he orders something, but he immediately gets taken the piss out of by three bozos sat in a booth. Like, they start saying things like, "Oh, look who's just walked into town. Well, looks like we got some fresh meat, boys. I'd say this guy looks like a college boy." You know, saying things like that. And it just made me think this is such a 80s, 90s sort of thing to have, like a cafe or a bar where there's just some random bullies sat around waiting to antagonise a main character as they walk in. I don't know if this is just in my head, I'm just making this up, but it doesn't feel like a modern day sort of thing. This scene in Graveyard Shift, it gave me a vibe of days gone by when you'd see a lot of scenes just like this somehow. But the film on the whole was definitely more than I expected. I thought that this would be a really throwaway adaptation of a very lesser known Stephen King story, but actually this really does the original short story justice. This was far more than I thought it would be, and I would definitely recommend it. And I'd recommend the original short story as well. I don't know if you can pick it up on a PDF just as a solo story, or whether you're forced to buy the whole collection, but just buy the whole collection. It's probably only like £5 or £6 or something like that. But yeah, definitely like this a lot. So normally at this point of the review, I would show you a copy of the film that I've just talked about, but I don't own Graveyard Shift. I watched this on YouTube, albeit the version on there does have Spanish subtitles on the bottom, which is kind of annoying, but I got used to it after 5 or 10 minutes. It wasn't a problem. There are versions of this you can buy on DVD. I checked eBay. As to whether I will be buying one going forwards, I'm not sure. I mean, I really like this film, but will I bother to buy it, given that I could theoretically just watch it on YouTube again? My prediction is that I won't ever buy this. Right, shall we get to the bag of terror? Find out how I'm going to score this? I think we should. So we've got 1, 2, 3... 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It was better than I thought it would be, and I would absolutely recommend that you check it out, especially as you can watch it for free. Right, no reading update today. I've still not finished Alien 3, but I'm getting there. I've reached the point where Dylan and Ripley, they're just starting to plan their whole thing where they try and trap the creature in the lead works towards the end, so I'm not too far off, and when I'm finished I'll do my mini review, but not today. Right, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.